And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour on what has been a fast-moving news day and what is turning out to be a fast-moving news night. In particular, you will have noticed as the day went on and into this evening, there has been a ton of news and an increasing amount of news on the case of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi-born dissident journalist who has disappeared. It was sort of surreal to see those images early today of the American Secretary of State in Saudi Arabia, meeting with that country's leadership, while the kingdom heads into week 3 now of trying to come up with an explanation for what happened to this Washington Post journalist after he walked into a Saudi consulate in Turkey and then was never seen or heard from again. I mean, it's unsettling enough to see these images, right? The U.S. Secretary of State yucking it up with the ruling crown prince of Saudi Arabia, while that crown prince stands fairly credibly accused of orchestrating the murder of a U.S.-based journalist, a Virginia resident, an employee of one of America's great national newspapers. And there's Mike Pompeo. Ha, 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 great to see you, my old friend. Then shortly after we got those images out of Saudi Arabia, the president himself gave an interview to the Associated Press from the Oval Office in which he said this apparent murder case, in his words, is just another case of you're guilty until proven innocent. To understand some of what the president is talking about there, I think it may be worth remembering that since Jamal Khashoggi went missing, President Trump has also publicly asserted that the U.S. government has an active investigation into this matter, that in fact we have investigators on the ground where Khashoggi disappeared looking into this. The president has said that publicly. That does not seem to be the case. After the president made that public assertion that there's some U.S. investigation underway where Khashoggi disappeared, the FBI had to clarify to the press that actually, no, we're not. We're not looking into this. The FBI has not been invited to investigate this matter in Turkey. They have not been on the ground investigating this matter, despite the fact that the president's saying they were. But now it's clear from the president's behavior, I think that one of two things is going on here. We are facing now either the prospect that the president can't criticize Saudi Arabia and its leaders for some reason. He's somehow beholden to them for a reason he cannot or will not explain. He feels bound for some reason to literally let them get away with the murder of a U.S. resident. Or there's the alternate prospect here, that there are no ulterior motives driving the president's behavior, that there's nothing secret or compromising that we need to know about that's operating behind the scenes here. Rather, this is simply a manifestation of the fact that the president doesn't think that murdering a journalist for the Washington Post is all that big a thing. Why would we care? I mean, I shouldn't say that these two prospects are mutually exclusive. I guess they could both be true. He could both be compromised by the Saudis in the sense that he's not free to criticize them, no matter what they do, even when they start killing U.S.-based journalists. And alongside that, he could also not really feel like criticizing this kind of a murder because of who was murdered, and he doesn't think this kind of a murder is that big a deal. I mean, they could both exist, right? But it seems to me those are the feasible explanations thus far for the president's behavior. I have yet to hear any even proposed alternate explanation for the president's behavior from anybody inside the White House or from the president himself, not least in this new interview that he's just done with the AP tonight. So we're watching that story. We've actually got some breaking news on that story coming up in a moment with a New York Times reporter who just broke a really important piece of this. Before we get to that interview, I want to let you know, though, in terms of what else is coming up this hour, we're going to know 3 weeks from tonight whether or not America is going to change up the Congress after these first 2 years of the Trump presidency. Today is the deadline to register to vote in 6 more states: Louisiana, Kansas, Maryland, New Jersey, Oregon, and West Virginia. Today's the voter registration deadline in all those states. We've got a couple of big stories coming up tonight on the election and specifically your ability to vote in these elections. Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp got sued 2 more times in the past 24 hours over serious voter suppression concerns in his state, where he is running the election as Georgia's Secretary of State, and he is also running for governor as the Republican Party's nominee for that job. We'll have news on that coming up. We also just got actually some great voting news out of Georgia. We've been covering a lot of bad voting news out of Georgia. We got great voting news out of Georgia tonight. It's not at all partisan. It is not a tilt for one side or the other. It's just really great news from that state. We're going to have that good news story coming up in just a moment. But as I said, this has been a day and particularly an evening of continuing breaking news, a lot of which relates to Jamal Khashoggi. Just tonight, the New York Times has published the results of basically some forensic video and photographic analysis, digging into the identity of the 15-man Saudi team that Turkey says flew into Turkey and traveled to the Saudi consulate there at the time of the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi. Now, what's particularly important about what the Times has done tonight with this forensic work is that this reporting from the Times tonight is going to constrain, I think, and also sort of lay bare Saudi Arabia's response thus far to the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi, but also President Trump's response as well. I mean, the bottom line here is that we still have exactly no idea what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. 2 weeks ago today, he walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and he just disappeared. Never heard from again. Now, Turkey has been saying that he was lured into that consulate and then killed by a 15-man team, a kill team that flew in from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Saudi government, meanwhile, is denying any involvement. For days now, President Trump has been telegraphing that he spoke with King Salman and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, MBS, and they both reassured him that they had nothing to do with the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi, that they too are concerned about his whereabouts, and they are not only working with Turkey to get to the bottom of this, but they're also conducting their own internal investigation. Yesterday, President Trump himself decided that he would test balloon one of the newest Saudi talking points about what might have happened to Jamal Khashoggi. So it might seem like the rulers of that country should be off the hook in his disappearance. President Trump told reporters yesterday, quote, "It sounded to me like maybe these could have been rogue killers. Who knows?" It's literally the phrase he used, rogue killers, who knows? A few hours later, CNN, then the New York Times, then NBC News all reported that the Saudi government, in fact, is discussing a plan in which they might admit that Jamal Khashoggi was killed in their consulate, but they would say it was carried out by, what did Trump say? Rogue operatives. He was killed in our consulate, but it wasn't ordered by the government. These were rogue operatives who killed him on their own recognizance during an interrogation or a rendition attempt that went horribly awry. By claiming that this thing was carried out by rogue agents, not controlled by the Saudi government, that would presumably be an effort to absolve the Saudi leadership, particularly to absolve the Crown Prince, MBS, of any responsibility. It would allow Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, to say that he didn't order the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Someone went rogue. He can't be held accountable for it. Well, now tonight, the New York Times has dug in, and they say they have independently verified the identity of at least 9 members of this 15-member team of Saudis. They say they've confirmed that they're members of the Saudi security services, the Saudi military, or other Saudi government ministries. The Times say that they compiled this information using a whole bunch of different sources: facial recognition software, publicly available records, social media profiles, a database of Saudi cell phone numbers, Saudi news reports, leaked Saudi government documents, and in some cases, the accounts of witnesses in Saudi Arabia and countries the Crown Prince has visited. So the Times tonight says they're able to place a number of the suspects identified by Turkey in the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi as being in the same place as Mohammed bin Salman, being in the same place as the Crown Prince, MBS, on several occasions. And this is the guy who's going to haunt your dreams a little bit tonight. This guy on the left side of the picture here, this one guy who is identified by Turkey as a member of this 15-man team. Here he is in a photo with MBS in Madrid, in Spain, in April of this year. Here's the same guy again with MBS, this time in Paris. Here he is again with MBS, this time in Boston. Here he is again with MBS, this time in Houston. This guy has been seen with the Crown Prince, MBS, many times just this year, by his side as he gets off planes, standing guard. I mean, presumably, if this same guy, was present in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul when Jamal Khashoggi disappeared inside that consulate, then that would provide a direct link between the ruler of Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince, MBS, and the disappearance or the killing of Mr. Khashoggi. It would be a heck of a coincidence if this guy who travels with him and is always seen with him also happened to be in that consulate. And MBS had no idea? Really? It would also shatter the suggestion, which President Trump and the Saudis are now trying to float together, that Mr. Khashoggi might have died in some rogue operation, right? That wasn't at all related to the Crown Prince. Apart from linking at least 9 of the 15 Saudis to the Saudi royal court, the New York Times also points out the mere presence of an autopsy expert as one of the suspects who is also reportedly in the consulate, suggesting that the killing might have been part of the original plan, not something that happened accidentally. You don't bring along the autopsy expert if you're planning to just ask the guy hard questions. The Times tonight details a slew of this guy's titles, including his most recent, where he was the head of the Saudi Scientific Council of Forensics. The Times notes, quote, such a senior figure in the Saudi medical establishment was unlikely to join a rogue expedition organized by an underling. What the New York Times is reporting here tonight is that if President Trump is going to participate with the Saudi royal family, with the rulers of Saudi Arabia, in trying to claim that whatever happened to this U.S.-based journalist is some act of rogue actors totally unconnected to the Saudi royal family and to, in particular, the Crown Prince, they are going to have a very hard time making that case if they intend to make it based on any evidence, because all of the publicly available evidence compiled by the Times and others suggests that at least some of the people who otherwise inexplicably were in the consulate when Khashoggi died seem to be directly connected to the ruler of Saudi Arabia. Joining us now live from Istanbul, Turkey, where it is past the middle of the night, is David Kirkpatrick, international correspondent for The Times, who is one of the authors of this piece tonight, lead author of this piece that's just posted to The Times. Mr. Kirkpatrick, thank you for staying up so late to join us. Really appreciate it.
Good to talk to you.
So I tried to summarize both the implications and the basic findings of your piece tonight. First, let me just ask you if I got any of that wrong, or if that adequately sort of summarizes where you have landed with this reporting.
Yeah, no, you pretty much got it there. So 4 of these people appear to be members of the Crown Prince's security team, and one of them is a very high-ranking Saudi autopsy expert, maybe perhaps the preeminent forensic doctor in the kingdom.
In terms of the autopsy expert, I realize this is morbid, but I guess that's the point. Can you explain to our viewers and explain to me what the implications are of having an autopsy expert on this supposed team? I guess I don't even really think about, outside of sort of CSI and TV and detective novels, I don't really know where you might see an autopsy expert doctor out in the wild, why they would be traveling with other people from the security forces and the military, what this guy might have been doing there and what this might say.
It's ghoulish, for sure. It does look like this. I mean, let me put it another way. Turkish officials who have been our source for much of this information concluded that this was a premeditated assassination, that the reason why you bring along an autopsy doctor is because there was an intent to cut up and dismember the body in order to dispose of the remains. What's more, the doctor brought with him a bone saw. So they were certainly ready for the possibility that they would be dismembering a body that day.
One of the things that has been sort of hard to get our hands around here, I think, in terms of understanding the evidence as it is building in the public reporting around this case, especially in the absence of any official investigation that we can do any sort of accounting for, it's been hard to know whether or not Turkish officials might have their own equities, might have their own reasons for trying to paint the darkest and most ghoulish possible picture about what happened here. I don't understand enough about the relationship and rivalries between Turkey and Saudi Arabia around something like this to know whether or not Turkish officials should be trusted when they tell American reporters what they think happened here. It seems to me that this is a big leap forward for you at the Times tonight, because you at the Times have independently verified so much of what Turkish officials have previously suggested might have happened in terms of this kill team, for lack of a better term.
We're still relying on the Turks for the names of the suspects, the people who got off the planes. They're the ones who have the passports. But that said, they've begun leaking some of those actual passport copies. And you've asked a very good question about the relationship between the Turks and the Saudis, because on the one hand, there is certainly some rivalry between the two governments. On the other hand, the Turks have gone way out of their way to avoid a fight with the Saudis or a confrontation with the Saudis previously. So you might ask, why are they disclosing this information? You might also ask, why aren't they disclosing more of it? Why is it coming so far mostly in the form of leaks to us or to the pro-government media? And why haven't they turned it over to American intelligence agencies? There's some thought, certainly among the friends of Jamal Khashoggi, that the Turks, in a sense, are complicit in the cover-up if they don't move expeditiously to make all the evidence that they say they have public. In defense of that evidence, a few days ago, it looked like Saudi Arabia was saying, and even the Crown Prince was saying, Jamal Khashoggi left the consulate freely. We know nothing about this. They've moved. They have begun to come around to acknowledging the central claim of the Turks, which is that Jamal Khashoggi died in the consulate. And that tells me there's something to the evidence.
David Kirkpatrick, international correspondent for the New York Times. He's also the author, most recently, of Into the Hands of the Soldiers, Freedom and Chaos in Egypt and the Middle East. Mr. Kirkpatrick, you get a special fake award from the Rachel Maddow Show for staying up past 4 a.m. local time to be with us live tonight. Thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you very much.
All right. As I mentioned, tons of new stuff to get to tonight. It's going to be a busy show. Stay with us.